Dear friends, great pleasure to welcome you here on this important day when we are opening the new museum, Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. This important day has a lot of events to visit. You can see the information in our leaflets on our website, and life is going on there, believe me. One of the central events today, the first day of public admissions to Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, is the talk that's taking place here and now. We have philosopher, thinker Boris Groys and artist Anton Vidokle. In one of the important strategic programs of Garage, Anton filmed a movie here in Russia in summer last year. Thanks to the efforts of an extensive international team, he managed to do it. The central theme of this film was the complex development of Russian Cosmism. On all the hurdles of Russian Cosmism, what Russian Cosmism is, who is representing Russian Cosmism, and why is Cosmism so influential for the entire culture of the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. This is the topic of our public talk. The moderator is the curator of Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, Ms. Kate Fowle, and the participants of the talk are Anton Vidokle and Boris Groys. And let me tell you that this is Cosmos, is the title of the film, which will be shown in Garage, and we have a specially published book, the anthology made by Boris Groys, with the most important texts of the Russian cosmists. You can buy this book in the bookshop of Garage Museum, and after the end of the talk we'll have the autograph session. Let me stop now and give the floor to Boris Groys. Please.
Hello. As Katia said, I'm Kate Fowle. I'm the chief curator of Garage, and it's great to see so many people here on Russia Day. It's good that with the sun outside, it's good that everybody decided to come in. I apologize for speaking in English and not in Russian. I'm the only one that will be speaking in English. And I don't know if anybody needs translation, but there are translation kind of earpieces if you need them. So. Does anybody, if people put up their hand, if they want one, then we can always bring one over to you. There's a hand over there. There's one there. So we will bring them to you as fast as possible. So today I'm going to be asking Anton and Boris questions. We're going to explore what Cosmism is and the perspectives of Anton and Boris as two people who have been spending quite a lot of time over the last few years thinking about Cosmism and its relevance today, as well as thinking about it as a historical moment. So I'll be asking a few questions, but then we'd like to open it up to the floor and invite you to ask questions. So get them ready, and as soon as you get bored with what I'm asking, shoot your hand up and we'll hand it over to you. So I want to start with a basic question first. And can you talk a little bit about why Cosmism came into being and what it actually is? What are the philosophies or the kind of intentions behind Cosmism? And like, how did it start? Boris, would you like to?
Пожалуйста. Can you hear me? Cosmism, Russian Cosmism, was the response to the wave of secularization of atheism and materialism, the scientific materialism that came to Europe and Russia in the second half of the 19th century after the crisis of the German idealism. and the victory of the industrial civilization and sciences. And at that moment, the belief in the immortality of soul got weakened, and there was a feeling that this is rather a fiction, which witnesses to the lack of advanced thought among those who believe in it. And the only reality at that time was considered to be the human body. So the shift to the human body as the only reality, tangible reality, transformed the attitude to it, because for a long period of time the body was treated as the cage for the soul, and the purpose of the religion was to get rid of the body and to give freedom to the spirit. At the moment when the body became the only reality, it converted from the cage for the soul into a medium due to which the human being could be better connected to the nature, to the animal world, and to cosmos, space. That is to say, the attitude to the body, to its life, and life after death as well, suddenly changed. It became the central theme of our relations with the world, because our body was penetrated by the sun rays and other cosmic rays, let's say, and some particles coming to us from cosmos, from the space. And here we can see the origination of a certain mix of despair and hope. The despair was that maybe cosmos and the earth will be destroyed. Recently we saw it in Lars von Trier's work that the melancholy planet will arrive and destroy everything. And the hope, meaning that thanks to the body being material, the conditions of its existence are material too. Humans and the technology are capable of overcoming all the possible disasters, and they can control the status of the human body. That was the hope. So there emerged a new field of frustrations, new field for opportunities, expectations and hopes. Let me say that the cosmist philosophers are describing these realia, and since then things haven't changed much. We live in the same, pretty much the same paradigm that they described.
Anton, when you first started doing your research into Kosmism and started becoming interested, I know that you were particularly looking at some of the protagonists, and Fyodorov in particular. So could you talk a bit about some of the people, the protagonists behind the beginning of Kosmism?
Да, конечно.
Yes, of course. In fact, it was by pure chance that I learned about Kosmism from Ilya Kabakov, the Russian artist. I was asked to interview him about 3 years ago. I went to visit him at his workshop. He lives in the US. And for some reason he never learned speaking English. That's why he's leading an isolated life. He was very happy that I came, and we talked for 5 or 6 hours, and I thought he will never let me go from his studio. And he mentioned then the cosmist, he mentioned Fyodorov, and I know his works very well because I always liked his installations and his entire scope of works. But when I learned about Kosmism, I started to read Fyodorov's books, and I realized that there exists a huge layer of cultural information that includes scientists, philosophers, artists, poets, filmmakers, designers, doctors, revolutionists, activists, organizers of something. And the majority of them were really spectacular or bright people, very special people. The first film that will be shown in Garage let me say, this film is based on the ideas and concepts by Fyodorov, but this is the first film. The series contains 3 films. The second film is I will be working on the ideas of the Russian scientist Alexander Chizhevsky. In a sense, he was the disciple of Tsiolkovsky. He was a cosmist too. And the third film will be dedicated to the 2 projects by Alexander Bogdanov. The first project called Project Cult, and his second medical project is in the Institute of Blood Transfusion. In the past, it was located in the place near the today's French embassy.
It'll be interesting to go into more of those details later, but first I wonder if both of you could just say a little bit about how Cosmism, it was very unique in the way that it was basically a philosophy or a movement. I'm not sure if you would say it was a movement, but it went across religion, science, technology, the creative knowledge, and in a way that it was a different kind of universalism, or it represented a different kind of universalism. And it also was very connected to some form of utopia. So could you talk a little bit about how you see it in relation to kind of universalism and utopia?
I think that the traditional European universalism was related to the sphere of the one and the only God, or with the human mind. That is to say, it was the belief that we are all connected by the divine power, or we are connected because we are considered to be rational beings. Of course, it was Homo sapiens. We're all Homo sapienses, and that was our difference from the animals. I think it was the beginning of the crisis of the end of 19th century, when it was found out that there is no common mind, but there are specific forms of collective or individual, let me say, craziness. And there are no bits of common sense or mind. This crisis of enlightenment that emerged at that time led us to the question, why don't we have this common universal mind? The answer was because the bodies are different. René Descartes used to say that I exist, therefore I think. The classical answer is, if you didn't exist, you wouldn't think either. Okay, this classical answer meant that the body is before any thinking, any mind, any brain. Everything is determined on the level of body. And at this particular moment, cosmos became the new form of universalism, because we realized that we live differently and we think differently, but we live in one world. What we share is not the mind, but the common material space of existence. So cosmos is something that we share, even if we think differently. People believe differently, but they live in one and the same world. This feeling became the driving force in the 20th century. That is to say, that was the Cosmism. And if you say that Russian Cosmism is a bit specific, I would say yes. Thing is that the European crisis of religion belief was largely caused by the fact that people were giving up any hopes they had for religion. They said, there is no God, then we will die, and from our cadavers the grass will grow. So although this opinion was pessimistic, but people were ready to accept it. Russians, for example, Fyodorov, refused to accept it, and Lenin was not accepting it either. That is to say, the Russian materialism, whether this is communistic materialism or cosmic materialism, had the goal to materialize all the promises given by the European philosophies or religions. Hegel promised the kingdom of absolute spirit, but he didn't make it true. Communism will make it true. Jesus Christ promised resurrection, but he didn't make it happen. The Russian people, by collective efforts, will make it come true. That is to say, materialism was perceived as a program of materialization. This is a very untypical understanding, by the way. If we look at, and you can often read about it, if we look at the European, the history of the development of European spirit, it is always described as a history of insult and disappointment. In the beginning, people thought they are in the center of the world, then they realized that they are just small particles of the sand in the universe, and then they realized that they are governed by some subconscious instincts. So every stage of development was hurting humans more and more. So this Russian cosmist is a deeply insulted person by this long history of insults. Russians, on the other hand, didn't want to be heard, didn't want to be insulted, and they decided to make things better. So this program of making things better and not being humiliated and fix everything, let's say, that is the source of a lot happening in Russia and partly the source of Russian Cosmism.
Anton, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, the aspect of utopia, in terms of the second part of your project in the new building is presenting a series of works, avant-garde works, Malevich and his followers. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your interest in including this in like the way that you'd like to present it at this stage, and how you think about the kind of social utopias that many of the people interested in Cosmism were looking at or following or interested in trying to develop.
Well, for me as an artist, there was always something unclear in the words of the Russian and Soviet avant-garde artists within Soviet modernism and Soviet art. We had a group of curators from the Museum of Contemporary Art of New York recently visiting Russia. 2 years ago they had a beautiful exhibition called something like The Beginnings of Modernism in Painting or something like that, and they had a big exhibition hall with the Russian avant-garde works where there were depictions of space stations, some architectural forms for the buildings that were meant to be built in the space. But there was nothing mentioned these are not just formalistic objects, but rather the attempts to imagine what will the structure of life be in different conditions in space, in cosmos. So when I decided to film this series of films and make these exhibitions, from the very beginning I tried to make a more curatorial and historical project. And I wanted to try and look at the Russian and Soviet avant-garde from the perspective of Cosmism, because if you read the diaries of the artists, if you look at the sources of their creative life, it becomes clear that they all at some moment of time were affected by impacted by the ideas of Cosmism. Maybe Boris can add something. Well, probably I can say a few words about these vibrations. The Russian avant-garde thought was always going from the idea of chaos, Nietzschean chaos, or maybe earlier chaos, which cannot be controlled, and so the better it is. When we read the works of Malevich, we see a lot of it. Neither communists nor other people will take the control over the matter. and the victory over the sun will be the attempt to establish the control over the world. This will be the victory of chaos associated with the freedom. Strangely, but even in the works of Tsiolkovsky, you can find the texts dedicated to the same idea. He is writing that every atom, every nucleus or the matter is a thinking matter. Every particle is a living particle. And then he writes that I'm working on the idea of resurrection and sending the bodies on the rocket into other planets. But let me share this thought before I die. So my thought is, when you die, you will be very happy because all the nucleuses of your body will get free, and this will be extreme happiness for them because all the particles of your body will be happy and you as a whole body will be happy too. This is the very important thought I wanted to mention and Tsiolkovsky mentioned. But he didn't notice even that this important idea is contradicting to all his other ideas. That is to say, in this huge cultural field, there was always this going to extremities, like the hope for explosion on one hand, and the resurrection, stabilization of civilization, scientific technical progress. They always existed in parallel, but never did we make the final choice for this or that.
It's interesting because, as you're saying, and as you mentioned earlier, some of the thinking behind Cosmism was very radical in terms of what it wanted to change, but there was this belief that it was possible, that it was going to happen. And I wonder if you can kind of expand on that and like what you think about it in relation to communism as one kind of big project, and the revolution, where there was this similar kind of belief that it was possible to actually kind of make a difference and make a change. It's not just a philosophy, it's not just a kind of visual dream of like thinking through something. It's like, why was it that people actually at that time believed that it was possible to do this?
Yes, they did think it was possible, but not always, as I mentioned. Firstly, if God is dead, everything is dead, the soul, the spirit is dead, the mind is dead, the subject, let's say, died, yeah? Okay, so everything died. It turns out that the entire material world may be at our disposal, let's say. And if there is no level, a divine or a devil level to control us, we can perceive the world as the place for our absolute power. And once you think about this world that you can absolutely control, you think of a superhuman. But the superhuman is in a contradiction, because we are also part of the matter. And if it is so, that then in spite of the fact that nobody owns us and nobody controls us, the very flow of life, the very development of the matter is a huge flow that involves us too, and we cannot overcome it. On the other hand, this can be quite a pleasant feeling. What I want to say is Cosmism is in fact very positive, because during a long period of time everything was quite depressive. For example, you had to deserve salvation, you had to work hard, you had to do your best, you had to put up some special effort, so on and so forth. And after that you never knew if you are going to be saved or not. Or, for example, technical progress. You had to put up a lot of efforts, but then everything was in vain, because the next generation will come and say, you idiots, you did everything wrong. You had to do it differently, this is out of fashion. not interesting anymore. So every thing like this is a frustration, frustration, frustration. But Kosmism is a huge machine to overcome the frustration. And by the way, this is something Bogdanov is talking about, and Fyodorov as well. And they say you either work not for a big boss, but for your own immortality. But yeah, if you were talking about your own immortality, why don't you work on it? And yes, your own personal immortality is something you would love to work at. And he was saying that it's very bad to work for others, and it's really even worse to work for the next generations. This will be a total failure. While if you work for yourself, for your own immortality, this is good. But if you don't believe that this is feasible and possible, and by some fantastic explosion, the hurricane of life will take you away, you will be happy because all the molecules, your body will get free, you will be happy. That is to say, you either work for immortality. If you don't manage, then you will find yourself in this extreme happiness, in this ecstatic happiness. Both options are very attractive compared to the previous options of working for the big boss or other generations. They are even more attractive. Well, to add to this, you know, now every year we can see some new quotations of famous writers becoming very trendy. Over the last 13 months, everybody is quoting the paragraph from Walter Benjamin, where he describes the picture of Paul Klee, Angelus Nobis, and what Angel sees when he turns back is just the destruction, because the entire history is about disastrous deaths. All the empires are passing away, everything disappears, while Kosmism, as a vision of the world, is very strange, because it treats the history not just a series of disasters, but a field full of opportunities. Because in fact, nobody is finally dead until we depleted all the attempts to revitalize these bodies. Everything is not over. All these projects can go on. So this is an entirely different feeling and an entirely different vision. And I think he's the only philosopher to see the positive.
I'm wondering if you think, I mean, Kosmism had an effect outside of Russia, but all of the key people, everybody involved in it, whether it's Tolstoy, Malevich, Fyodorov, Tsiolkovsky, they're all Russian. And Boris, you were saying earlier that there definitely is a kind of state of mind, or there's a way in which people were wanting to think. But is there also something about national identity? What, do you see that national identity connects into this at all, or not?
Probably yes, most probably yes. But I think that the national identity is related not to the characters of and their ideas, but the rhythm of existence. If we look at the Russian avant-garde, during the period of European and American classical formalism until mid-60s, there was no interest at all to the Russian avant-garde in the Western countries. Now the interest is very strong, but it emerged in the late 60s, beginning of 70s, when unexpectedly in the Western countries there emerged the same moods as there were in the Russian avant-garde, when all these abstract forms and avant-garde gestures started to be linked to the political life, utopical projects, because this was not the case in the European formalism before, but this emerged at that time. And when it emerged, suddenly everybody remembered about the Russian avant-garde. Not that Russian avant-garde was eliminated down to the Russian national identity, no. It's just the historical pace of it coming to existence and disappearing was slightly different. If we speak about the Russian Cosmism, it has all the chances today. And today people are really paying attention to it, because in the Western countries now they have the new shift to the materialism. The new shift to the materialism, and I would say the total shift. Apart from the speculative realism of Bruno Latour or something like this, we don't hear about anything else. So here we talk about a human being as who is perceived as a body involved in material processes. But this shift to the radical materialism happens mostly in the left-winged intellectual environment. And it happens in the environment that suffers from disappointment in utopia. This materialism is and its popularity is related to the traumas of the last decades. And these traumas emerged from the disasters of socialistic utopias that the intellectuals lived in, starting from the end of 60s, beginning of 70s. And in a sense, this is a situation which is very similar to the situation of the Russia end of 19th century, because we had the end of the peasantry, villages as a class, and the emergence of industrial society, etc. And unexpectedly, these utopian thoughts and energy started to transform into these cosmic materialistic processes. There seems that there is a certain discrepancy between them, but still that's the way it happened. And here we have an almost 100% coincidence with the Russian Cosmism of the end of 19th century and our times. I am studying Russian Cosmism for a long time, and I never saw any particular interest to it, and now I can feel this interest everywhere. Simply speaking, the time has come for it.
Anton, do you want to comment on that as well? Because I'm interested in the fact that you said that your interest began, I mean, I know that you knew about Boris's research, but also with Ilya Kabakov and talking to him.
Нет, я, кстати, не знала о книге, которую опубликовал Борис.
No, by the way, I didn't know about the book Boris published. I think it was published in 1993, because he published it in Germany, in German language. And I think there is a huge gap between the English-speaking world and Germany, etc. So I didn't know about this book until 3 years ago. So yes, I just found out about it via Kabakov.
But do you think that the, in terms of your interest, because you've spent now a lot of time traveling, you're going to continue to kind of go to different places and look into the resonances now of Cosmism in different ways, through figures, but also through places and through. So, is it something that you think you can extend outside of Russia in terms of where you would go? Do you think there's a way in which it has spread further, or is it something that for you want to continue focusing on the kind of Russian aspect of it?
Наверное, да, в основном мне, конечно, интересно.
I think I'm largely interested in the development of these ideas in Russia, not only in Russia, let me say on the former USSR territory, in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, although these ideas also had their continuation in the United States. There was a very interesting transition, because many books of cosmist scientists were translated into German language in Germany in 1920s, 30s. Then slightly later they were translated into English. And many American scientists, especially those who work in cybernetics, computer science, they knew about some works, at least Tsiolkovsky they knew, and other cosmists like Bogdanov and his science architectology that he invented as a science. So yes, there exists a wider international context, which is quite an interesting one, because these people working in Kosmism, they were very extraordinary in the US, in Germany as well.
So I'm going to ask one more question, so get yours ready. And really, it's a very, very simple question. I think that the two of you, in very different ways, have raised the profile of Kosmism, if you like, now. And Boris, you just said, well, the time is now, it just feels like it's the right time. But could you both talk a little bit more about why you think that the time is now, or why now to kind of relook at Kosmism and understand it from a contemporary perspective, rather than just as a historical moment?
I would say that you can never say it for sure, because everything is still in the movement and in some state of uncertainty. But I see quite interesting processes. They are very obvious for me. And this insisting on materialism, insisting on the fact that the most important thing about human is the body, and insisting on the fact that human being is part of the material processes, whatever I mentioned, Bruno Latour and many other influential authors, it looks slightly different than the traditional ecology or the traditional environment, because the traditional environment, it's intentionally that we always spoke about the environment, because in the center there was human and the rest was the environment of the human. The traditional environmental thinking was anthropocentric, and in this sense it was extremely traditional. In any case, everything happens within the categories of human being and the environment was assessed from the perspective whether this was useful for the human being or not. I think that the trendy theories of Anthropocene that are proceeding from Bruno Latour's school are changing the anthropocentric picture of the world into the geocentric picture, or the cosmocentric, I would say, picture of the world. So the question is not what the environment is for the human being, but how does the human being impact the environment. The interest proceeds not from the human being, but the interest proceeds from the universe, the earth. This resembles Vernadsky's thoughts, who was saying that the animals hugely impact the environment, because when they die, their bodies are decaying and they are enriching the earth, the soil, with different minerals. So the central theme here is the earth, the soil, while human being is treated in this universe as one of the many material factors for the development of the earth, while earth is one of the many material factors for the development of the universe. This is the shift from anthropocentric to geocentric development, and we can feel it very strongly. We can feel it very well, and it resembles the Russian Cosmism. Why do I say that it exists? This is very utopical, you know. On one hand, it seems that the human being is not in the center anymore. It just turned into a set of bones, muscles, tissues that are interesting for the cultivation of soil after he dies, on one hand. While on the other hand, you can feel the link of the human being to everything, the whole world. If I am an isolated anthropocentric subject and I'm in the center of everything, I have a purely formalistic connection to the world. Or let's say environmental protection, yeah? The majority of environmentalists are working mostly with the wastes, and the treatment of the waste. While suddenly, if we start thinking in the categories of Anthropocene, wastes are becoming the human contribution. We are waste, and our byproducts are the waste. And we suddenly happen to become the agents of a huge space project. This is, on one hand, of course, another insult, another disappointment. On the other hand, it opens up very unexpectedly some utopical thoughts. I think many people play on this now, and you can feel it.
Anton, why for you? Why now?
Well, I think all the other ideas in the world kind of didn't work, so maybe there came the time to try something radical, something like Kosmism. That's my brief answer. Итак, вопросы от аудитории, пожалуйста. Thank you very much for the discussion. My name is Kate. I am a fellow researcher of the Russian State Humanitarian University. Boris says that Kosmism tells us to work for yourself, but not for the future generations. But if we take socialism, which was based on Kosmism partly, how can you comment on this? Because millions of people in socialism were working for socialism and for the future generation. They didn't have their present. They were working for the bright future. Well, not only Fyodorov, but all the other cosmists were discussing this topic explicitly, and they were saying that this is the biggest mistake of the socialists and socialism as an ideology. That socialism, as Fyodorov says, is based on the inequality of the deaf and the living people, of the dead and the living people. Because the idea that every generation is working for the next generation and every next generation is using the result of the previous generation's work, and the previous generation has nothing, no profit from it, let's say. While as for the future, they say that in the future socialism will be built and some generations in the future will live happily. But this will be really unfair to all the previous generations who worked for the sake of communism, because they will be just rotten in the ground. And he says that, Fyodorov says, human beings shouldn't work for others in no form. The only thing one should rely on is the absolute egoism, absolute selfishness. Absolute selfishness is the belief and the need in personal immortality. Only socialism that can guarantee you resurrection, that can promise you to make you alive when the socialism finally arrives, is the fair socialism. Because if it doesn't promise so, it is then built on the unfair principles, the most unfair principles. It is merely enough to compare socialism with the traditional Christian thought. Christianity promises that if you are a good boy or a good girl, you personally will go to heaven and not somebody else. Anastasia Gacheva, Institute of World Literature, Museum Library of Fyodorov. My question is to the well-respected Boris Groys. He said that for Fyodorov the main topic was the topic of immortality. And I'm quoting you, the human shouldn't work for anyone else but himself. But this is rather the image of immortality which is developed in Prometheus cult tradition. It is not by chance that Fyodorov says that immortality and resurrection is impossible, neither morally nor physically. Fyodorov is a philosopher who conveys the radical discussion with egoism, with selfishness. His idea to the love of fathers and ancestors is what he means by others. I think selfishness is not quite accurate when we speak about Fyodorov. It can be rather related to the idea of selfishness which was manifested later on among biocosmists, for example, because biocosmists were also arguing with Fyodorov. They were saying, yes, we are also for the victory over death, but we don't need any resurrection or revitalization. I don't think it contradicts. You know, Fyodorov, in a sense, was a pro-Western author. And his concept of selfishness is this concept of reasonable selfishness. And Spencer and others also had this concept in their works. The care about yourself is the care about social well-being, because if there is no social well-being, your own project will fail. Your personal project will fail too. This means that if you want to be immortal, you personally, then your project, your life should be integrated in the state and the society which revitalizes and saves everybody. If it doesn't revitalize everybody, if this is not a universal promise, then this promise will not cover you personally either. This argument is a classical argument of the 19th century. This is the classical debate of our liberal democracy. If you believe that somebody's rights are violated, your rights will be violated too, because you may find yourself among them. So, of course, Fyodorov states that any personal resurrection project or immortality project should be integrated in the universal general project. At least because in a very traditional manner of the 19th century, which is still considered to be accurate, he's considered to be an egalitarian philosopher. He doesn't see any antagonistic difference between people. He doesn't think some are better, some are worse. For him, people are basically the same. All people are the same. This means that if you are fighting for yourself, you are fighting for everybody, at least because you are one of them. Of course, I agree that the post-revolutionary biocosmists had a sharper sense of the gap between today and the past, but that's why they failed. Please use the microphone for the translation. In the tradition of following Kosmism in the Russian space, just like in the United States, let's take the book of Young, the recent book of Young, the Russian Cosmism. There, Kosmism is considered in two categories. One is the secularized way, and the other one was the active Christian thought, where Solovyov, Berdyaev, Bulgakov, Florensky, Sinitsky, Muravyov are included. At least they explain it by the idea of creative activity of the human being, which is caused by the fact that the human being feels himself the master of the evolutionary process and the main responsible one for the evolution and progress. And the second stream is the religious philosophical context, the interpretation of Christianity, when the humans, all the humans, are the collective developers of their own future. This is something what Anton slightly mentioned, the new understanding of the history. But the Christian cosmists are kind of far from you, yeah? No, I'm not, in this sense, I'm not much different from Fyodorov. I find everything interesting and I like everything equally. What I can say is I'm attentive to the details, to the differences. There is, of course, a lot in common, and you have mentioned it wisely, But there are differences. There are certain differences when Solovyov and his many students say that here God should intervene, here the miracle should happen. There must be a miracle. That's the separation line. You know, maybe miracle is closer to me personally, if we're talking about me personally. I believe in miracle even more, if you ask me. But I wanted to present you the people who ask themselves this very interesting question. Okay, we will have the miracle, but what if we don't have the miracle? I think this question, since I'm a philosopher, this is a purely philosophical question to me. And this is a purely philosophical question. What if it doesn't work? What will happen then? And in general. So they are trying to answer this question. If the miracle doesn't happen, then what will happen? У нас время для еще одного вопроса есть. Galina Moskaleova, photographer, artist. My question to Boris: immortality. We know that one of the immortalities, material immortalities, is to forget Herostratus. What is immortality for you? You know, I don't think it's my problem. I kind of don't feel myself personally responsible for it, and I don't feel I'm a decision maker. If I'm not a decision maker, let others think. If other people organize something to revitalize me, to make me become alive again, that's good. If not, okay, that's their problem. Sorry, the comment was off the microphone. No, this is the theory of Russian Cosmism. While I'm a more passive person, I think that others have to take care of me.
Anton, is there anything you'd like to add before we...
No, not really, but I think maybe it would be, probably not everybody has seen the film, so maybe... Huh?
No, I just want to invite you to come and see the film. It's shown in the Garage Museum new building and will be shown for 2 months. Thank you very much.
So, as Anton was saying, I don't know if you've been to the new museum building yet, but it's over that way, and it's free to get in. So. Go have a look at the film and the collection of works, and thank you very much for coming.